this Wednesday, 11th of the 11th, 2015. And thank you for joining us as always. I'm Jawad Jakub. Joining me is Baden Westerweller. How are you this week?
Yeah, very well, thanks. It's as you did mention just before we came on to air, it's hard to believe there's another race this weekend. It just seems to have gone a bit by the wayside. And there's probably more going on off track than on.
Oh, very much so. Considering what's going on off track as well, it's hard to believe that we've got a race on this weekend, but we do. It's the penultimate round of the 2015 championship. Only two more races to go until F1 goes back into hibernation, and this one's a real favourite of pretty much everybody, fans, the drivers. The Brazilian Grand Prix at the Interlagos circuit, a circuit enriched with so much history, as well as Brazil as a whole in Formula One. So many talented drivers to come out of there, not to mention, of course, Emerson Fittipaldi, Nelson Piquet, Ayrton Senna, the three Brazilian champions, and, of course, Felipe Massa, Rubens Barrichello, to name another few. But yes, this short but undulating circuit is 4.3 kilometres in lap length, and the race will go for 71 laps. Soft and medium tyres will be on offer for the drivers from Pirelli, and interestingly enough, there's an 80% safety car record as well at this track, which, is no surprise considering wet weather has affected this race on a number of occasions. James Allen, expert James Allen, suggested that perhaps Rubens Barrichello's 2004 lap record of a minute 9.822 could be smashed. This is considering that last year's pole lap from Nico Rosberg was only 2/10 shy, and James Allen went to explaining this as being the effect of the high altitude that this circuit is at affects the V6 turbos less than the normally aspirated engines. That's why we see them going faster just a little bit than the V10s and the V8s of yesteryear. So yeah, interesting to see that we might see some lap times tumble in this new V6 era, where everyone else has been complaining about how slow they are.
Certainly, it's been seldom since the commencement of 2014. There've been 5, possibly even further back seconds than the records. Really, when you go back a decade, around that circa 2004, that's where we see most circuits still on the calendar today. You can trace it back 2003, 2004. They were lap times just mighty fast, and obviously there's a lot of talk in coming years that they might be able to get back towards these kind of times when they have the new regs for 2017. But in the meantime, they've been well off that pace. So this is one of those few circuits that will offer some kind of comparable, just lap in, lap out, where it was going back a few years.
Yeah, correct. Very much so. But looking on towards what the form guide will look like, and Nico Rosberg, who had the pole position last year, also won the race last year as well. His final victory of 2014, and he's looking good at the moment, it must be said, on top of his form that he showed in Mexico with that dominant win. So could the German be on to win back-to-back races? We'll wait and see, because this is a circuit, interestingly enough, that Lewis Hamilton, his teammate, hasn't won at yet.
That can't be right for Lewis, since he worships Ayrton and all. He clearly it's one that would bring out emotion, what kind it would be and how it would be received. But you can see that it's one that he feels like he's got some natural connection towards, and you'll be doing everything you can to make sure that Rosberg can't end the season on a bit of a high if he could notch up consecutive victories.
Very much so. And Lewis Hamilton, in the build-up to the races, said that he would love to win there this year as a salute to his idol, Ayrton Senna, who, first of all, he matched his Senna's 3 championship victories, championship wins, with that title in being wrapped up in Austin. But this is a point that many have sort of raised after the Mexican Grand Prix, a little bit afterwards, I guess, and that was that perhaps Lewis let Nico win in Mexico. He wasn't switched on completely. What are your thoughts regarding this point?
He certainly didn't seem devastated to have conceded it to Nico, and we did see, of course, with that a little bit of a flare up around the safety car period when they switched both cars to a two-stop strategy. Lewis was pretty keen just to push on with the solitary stop, and yet when he was overruled by the personnel, he didn't budge. He didn't go against their wishes, and you can see really he's just at a point now where he's not going to rubbing in more salt into the wounds. He's done what he needs to for this season.
But do you reckon with the inspiration of trying to match Senna's victory or whatever here, do you think he may push a little bit harder? Just going off the theory that I'm not saying that it's definite that he let Nico win in Mexico, but going off that theory, would you reckon that we might see Lewis push harder this weekend?
Oh, certainly, yeah. This weekend, it's one really we have seen more of a traditional circuit that he hasn't won, so he'll be having more incentive there, obviously, to chalk it up as well as being in that significant year of his third title. So you can see he'll be back to his Austin pre-Austin levels as well, where he's not giving an inch, and we could see that the gloves out that again that turn one that everyone touts pretty much every weekend. Will there be carnage between the two silver arrows?
Yes, and Lewis is no stranger to carnage at turn one in Brazil. We'll cover that a bit later on when we hit Nostalgia Straight. But moving on, and Williams confident of backing up their podium that they achieved in Mexico 2 weeks ago. And Felipe Massa last year emphatically claimed third in front of his home fans, to the roaring delight of the fans, of course. And yeah, can Williams topple Ferrari this weekend? After all, they did have a one-off torrid weekend in Mexico. Did Ferrari? So could Williams potentially, vie for that podium place ahead of Ferrari?
Well, they've got the Mercedes power unit, of course, and that's always going to count with them. If Mercedes are strong there and the way the circuit works, we've seen them very strong in the past. So they're going to be, if not best of the rest, they're certainly going to be much more competitive, as we saw at Mexico. You're really squabbling and ultimately having a skirmish with the red cars. And it could come to pass that they're really in that battle, maybe for a P2, if something does happen between the two protagonists.
Yeah, and on the Ferrari side, certainly Sebastian Vettel feels confident that he could potentially win the final two races of the season. So that's a bit of extra confidence coming out of the Ferrari camp, certainly. But between Ferrari and Williams, it'll be interesting to see when we hit the track during practice and qualifying where they both hit, because Williams have been uh, quick in qualifying sometimes, but they haven't really translated that over to their race pace, where Ferrari generally, even when starting behind them, have made their way up through the field and made an impression.
Yeah, we only need to look back, as we mentioned so often, Silverstone, the one that got away. And if they're not going to win that one, then they're going to struggle to win a lot of others. So it's something they've got to chew on in the off season.
Very much so, and some news as well regarding Red Bull, who finally are going to debut their upgraded Renault power unit. It was available in Austin, but the team decided not to risk taking penalties in the wet weather, and same at Mexico with a new track. They didn't know where they would be, so they decided not to use it. But yeah, 11 of the 12 tokens have been used from Renault, and it's undecided whether both drivers will use it this weekend or perhaps even one. But that'll definitely mean there'll be penalties for Daniel Ricciardo and Danny Kvyat.
Oh, certainly it doesn't really matter at this point. It's all irrelevant. And in the backdrop of that, we've still got the debate of whether they'll even be present on the grid next season. And if it does come to pass that these upgrades have a quantifiable inroads to be made from it, then we could see them anyway just fighting their way through the field into some competitive points. And of course, they're back in the golden era. They were very much the team to beat around this circuit.
And of course, as well, potentially Red Bull could be on for a podium if the upgrades go well and if weather suit them, depending on depending on if they can make their way up through the field with those penalties, of course. But yeah, we'll talk a bit more about Red Bull in a sec as well, about what their future holds. We've heard more news certainly about this, but as we move down the order a little bit, there's a heated contest going on between the teams sitting 5th, 6th and 7th in the Constructors' Championship. They all seem confident that they can beat one another. Force India sitting 5th at the moment on 112 points. Lotus with 71 points in 6th, and Toro Rosso 65 points in 7th. Now, Force India and Lotus have both scored podiums this season, whereas Toro Rosso haven't. But 47 points between those two teams, and still plenty of points on offer in the Constructors' Championship. Could we see some movement between those three outfits?
Well, certainly for Force India, they'd be keen to really consolidate that P5. That'd be one of their most solid hauls in their current tenure. As for Lotus, obviously they've overcome a lot of hurdles throughout this season, and they're seemingly imminent reacquisition by Renault there. And as for Toro Rosso, as it is, they've just come on leaps and bounds this season. Clearly, they haven't had quite the successes with podiums, but regardless of where they end up, they're going to be pretty satisfied with their haul. And if there is carnage on Sunday and at the finale, then there's a chance they could even squeak up into a P6.
Interesting, yeah, very much so. And we'll move down the order a little bit more. And McLaren, which interestingly enough, they're the most successful team in Brazil in both of the circuits that they've raced on in Brazil in Formula One. They're the most successful team in terms of race wins. They're battling it out for 8th, I guess, in the Constructors' Championship with Sauber, and there's only 9 points in it for them. And what's the chances of them perhaps getting ahead of Sauber before the end of the season? And we know that it's pretty crucial in terms of prize money that they do.
I must admit, I had to do a little double take when I initially cast my eye over the running sheet for this week's edition. I hadn't realised that McLaren were in fact within this close striking distance to Sauber on account of that Swiss squad. They've been very consistent in their competitiveness, quite significantly in the middle to back portion of the season. We saw them always around that 9th or 10th, and NASA had a good haul a few races ago, and Ericsson's really lifted his game this year. And McLaren, of course, here or there, I guess, they've had their breakthroughs of 5th place, and then we had Hungary. And as a result of that, they're still very much in that hunt for a P8 in the standings, which would be something to salvage from what was, for all intents and purposes, probably a month or so ago, looking like the season which should never be spoken of within the Woking camp again.
Yeah, and it currently still seems that way as well. Still a lot of, as we discussed after Mexico, that some people are even using the word crisis now to describe McLaren's current situation, and whether there'll be improvements next season or not, it's hard to say considering the form. But with 2 races to go, I agree. There is a time for inroads to perhaps get those 9 points and get ahead of Sauber. 8th is the best they can do in the Constructors, but still, it's a significant loss in terms of revenue for the working team, isn't it?
And the Phantom sponsor, which was supposed to deliver tens of millions, that is 2.5 years, 3 years on, nowhere to be seen, conspicuously absent. That's not going to help, coupled with that the loss of income, which really, it's been a few years in the making now that they've been dropping down that field, and the nadir has now essentially been reached. Surely they could not be any worse next season.
Yeah, that's everyone's hope for sure. But in terms of our race, full race preview, we're going to be back on Sunday as always to recap qualifying and also detail the race ahead. And we'll move it on now and quickly to canvass what we're doing this week. We'll be looking at Red Bull's latest engine situation. Are they set to build a power unit in-house? Also, Lotus CEO Matthew Carter says that they're confident of the Renault deal being in place before the end of the season, so at Abu Dhabi. And Kevin Magnussen as well. Is he a driver that's found himself in the lurch again? We'll discuss that. And of course, as I said earlier, Nostalgia Straight will take a look at McLaren's last victory, which occurred at the Interlagos circuit quite a while ago, 3 years in fact. So yeah, Red Bull, are they potentially set to build a power unit in-house just for the Milton Keynes squad at the moment? It's reported that Renault will give them an unbadged combustion engine on its own, and on top of that, Red Bull will have to build the electronics and the hybrid systems. So interesting thing to pop up recently, considering they haven't secured a customer deal with any supplier at the moment.
Well, it seems in some compromise, both parties have broken bread. They've realised it's probably better to work with each other at this time when they've really had a bit of a drop from their former glories. And nevertheless, it is surprising that they have been able to come around so dramatically from the vicious words and barbs which have been traded so vitriolically earlier in the season. And you've got to remember, though, ultimately this is Formula One, and the inconceivable does tend to happen. Who would have thought Fernando Alonso would end up back at McLaren for one? So for this to be realised, it's still nothing set in stone. But if it were to come to pass that there is this not in any shape the same level of association as we've seen in the current tenure of 9 seasons, but for them to still have some relationship, that would be quite something.
But it would mean that there's no development from Renault for Red Bull. Renault would just give them the base engine, and Red Bull will have to do all the other developments. So in a sense, the relationship isn't it's a one-off purchase, and there will be no ongoing assistance from Renault. And interestingly enough, we've heard this name linked with the project many times. Mario Ilian, who's quite prolific in his past relationship with Adrian Newey at McLaren back in the late 90s during Mika Häkkinen's success, and he continuously denies that he has any involvement with Red Bull, but his name was linked earlier when Red Bull were trying to push Renault out of their poor performance, and they perhaps would have sent him over there to fix things. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Well, there was certainly friction between Ilian and Renault early on in the season, especially as they both had their own trains of philosophy there. They ultimately just couldn't sit down and collaborate over it, and as a result, the entire campaign has just fallen by the wayside from both respects. So whether there's any collaboration ongoing, or whether Ilian wants to focus all his priorities on this vaunted independent engine Ilmor from 2017, and whether Red Bull wants any part of that from this point remains to be seen. But if he were to end up being on board with Red Bull itself next season, reunited, as we say, with Adrian Newey, that would be a recoupling of quite an infamous relationship. Really, 1998 was the high point of that, when they were peerless, especially in the early part of that season. So if they could get anything close to that, then maybe Red Bull's on the way back up. But a lot of water has to pass under the bridge first of all.
Yeah, very much so. And as we said last week as well, the development for RB12 has been halted somewhat, considering the late February start to the season. It's not a big turnaround, is it? Considering you'd think that a lot of teams would have started development on next year's chassis and power unit integration, perhaps about a month ago.
Well, a lot of teams almost have the standpoint that as soon as pre-season testing of the current season is out of the way, or the first race has been concluded, they're already looking towards 12 months down the track. So really, for them to still be in this genesis stage where they're figuring out what kind of PU is going to be married to the chassis and how the car is going to really just develop from there, it's quite complex these days. You don't just whack it in and off you go. It's pretty much like the two have some kind of synergy just between them. They're made for each other, and I don't know how Red Bull are going, whether they have alternate versions of their chassis on hand depending on which power unit will be fitted to the car. It's cutting it extremely fine, to say the least.
Very fine, yeah, indeed. And interestingly enough, we heard the other day from Ferrari's president, Sergio Marchionne, and apparently he's keen now on providing Red Bull a similar service. He said that the Ferrari could set up a separate project from their engine for all their customers and of course their own works team, but set up a separate project and provide engineering and production help for Red Bull from Maranello, and this engine would be developed in-house at Red Bull, but of course with Ferrari assistance. So, what's your thoughts on this move from Marchionni?
I did find this quite amusing at the time, considering all the bluster buff over the past few months and how it seemed for a long time there that Red Bull were in fact a lock to receive, if not the 2016 specification parity power with the works outfit, then this season's power, which is still not going to be a bad package to have. But now he's coming back to the party and saying they want to have not just this customer status, but an actual, I guess, association, if not on the track, then as technical partners. It's very intriguing where his long-term interests lie. Clearly, he's got some chess pieces on the table, moving it around, trying to obviously look after his own interest in Ferrari, but whether this is in the long-term interests of several other outfits, whether it can indeed just turn around well for Ferrari and give them an even better look in the sport at a time when they still have a lot of polarizing views from others over their whole veto agreement and all those other things that have gone on in years gone past.
Well, I've pulled out this quote that Marchionni made in an interview with motorsport.com, and he said, I told this to Didi Mateschitz, and also to Marco, Dr. Helmut Marco, that my dream is not to beat Mercedes. My dream is making Ferrari what it's capable of being. So is he thinking more so, in a business sense than he is as a devotee of the Ferrari F1 team? Is he trying to get as many fingers in as many pies as he can, rather than being focused on just the Ferrari F1 team and the future of the Maranello factory squad?
Well, we must remember that Ferrari was listed on the New York Stock Exchange, their IPO last month, and that's obviously been quite a long time coming. And whether he's trying to appease now the shareholders there, they obviously want to see that they're getting a return on their investment. But ultimately, the F1, as many people in the media allude to, their marketing is almost conducted exclusively through their presence in Formula One. So whether he's trying to spin this off in a way into a more of a road car sense perhaps, and cash in on the whole Red Bull association there, considering their own energy drinks niche, it could be an inroad to the future that could spin them off into this new area, which they haven't really dabbled in previously.
Well, Red Bull, after all, are not. They exist to sell energy drinks and, of course, create awareness for the energy drinks. That's essentially what their F1 team is as well. And it's an interesting move from Marchionni. But yeah, we'll wait and see what happens. Surely there's more traction around this prospect of the unbadged Renault engine being developed in-house by Red Bull. But you had some interesting points that you wanted to add to this regarding Renault and indeed the sponsors Infinity and Total.
Yeah, well, the story which appeared last night, our time would have been in the morning in Europe, that essentially stating that this Renault association would continue, not necessarily on this just base supply of an ICE, and that's the end of it, but they're saying now it could almost be like a full-blown continuation, albeit with Renault perhaps removing their own title sharing with Red Bull for their power units. And that they wouldn't be too concerned about that, considering that their imminent return through Lotus is going to come, and they'd be wanting to focus all the minds of the followers onto their own outfit, whilst they can still have this association potentially with Red Bull. And if Red Bull are succeeding, then clearly it's going to be beneficial to them and their own developments if they can have any kind of, I guess, crossing back of the notes and the strategies, which could give their own factory team a boost. And then we see as well Infinity as the title sponsor in the past few seasons, and Total, synonymous with Renault. They will probably remain in this case for another season, but then they would fall back, and they'd remain almost exclusively with Renault. That'd be a logical fit there. And for Red Bull, then problem solved if this does happen. We'll have to wait and see, though. It's another train of thought which there's been many of them the last few months. Everyone thinks, oh, this has been said, so this will happen, but ultimately nothing has been confirmed yet. So it's only really for now something very tenuous, and we're going to have to keep on our toes in the meantime.
Keep on our toes indeed, perhaps until, as late as December as well, to find out what exactly happens for next year. But that's one thing, that it'll be in place for next year. But what about beyond? If Red Bull do end up having this unbadged engine and having it built in house, how long can they stretch that out? Can it be is it a long term prospect, or are they still hoping for a takeover or a partnership with another manufacturer, Volkswagen Audi group? Still
Yeah, or
wait and see.
perhaps part of the Volkswagen Group's rehabilitation once they've dealt with the immediate fallout from this emissions crisis by around that 2018, perhaps even 2019 period. They might be ready to make that entry, and of course, as part of that focus on the hybrid systems to appeal again, I guess it's something they're going to have to look at. And for Red Bull, clearly they're going to want to continue their return on the investment. They're not just going to want to sit around in the midfield. So clearly, unless they have a winner there, and this quite fancifully their own works package, which a few years ago had even been touted when we saw at the start of 2014 that Renault wasn't as competitive as they'd been in the previous year. Yet that never came to pass. So it would be quite ironic if we now did see in 2016, even if it's only a short-term proposition, that a Red Bull actually go to the lengths of putting their own engines into their cars, essentially.
Very much so, and we'll move it on then. Talking still about Renault, but indeed on their takeover of Enstone and Lotus. And Lotus CEO Matthew Carter says that announcement will happen regarding this takeover around the time of the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, which is still another 2 weeks away. He says that things are progressing, but these things take time. A lot of signing off to do. Sorry?
Insert Red Bull here. It sounds like these two outfits both have the same deal. Wait for Abu Dhabi and more will be known, or maybe not.
Oh, that's just the natural fallback, isn't it? Wait for the last race of the season. And if that doesn't happen, then as I said, we're going to be heading into December while a lot of personnel will be wanting to go on holiday. We'll be still waiting for the news to pop up. But interesting that Lotus team principal Federico Gastaldi has said that Renault personnel are already in the factory at Enstone working, as is Renault's former technical boss, Bob Bell, who recently we heard left Mana Marussia and now will be back in the Enstone fold as well. So it's touted that Bob Bell will be the technical director of the next chassis at Enstone, the Renault one, and it's still highly likely that the ART team boss, Frederic Vasseur, will be team principal as well. So, yeah, Carter also admits that next year will be difficult with the settling down of a new structure of the new team, and he says it's likely that 2017 will be when they'll be a lot more competitive.
Well, 2016 always loomed as a transition year. It's intriguing to see that the Lotus name will quite likely fall off the grid. There have been a lot of people, and myself included, going way back when we first heard murmurings about this reacquisition of the Enstone operation there. They might hold on to the Lotus moniker for another 12 months whilst they got the house in order ahead of a full-blown assault 2017 and beyond, when we do see that the new regs again, and perhaps we saw it with Benetton, of course, 2000, when Renault purchased the erstwhile Benetton outfit then for 2 years, essentially the balance of that 2000 and 2001 season, before 2002, when they became the Renault Works outfit in name once again. So it's intriguing, and the prize money as well, which is associated with it. Who knows whether that's at jeopardy, but perhaps Renault are just happy to foot the bill regardless and just get their name out there in their own right. But once more, having been left in the shadows for so long, of course, with the whole Red Bull criticism of the past few seasons.
Yeah, for the Renault brand, essentially, it will be good to restore their name. Of course, the scathing criticisms that we've had coming from Red Bull and all of its members has been quite tarnishing to Renault's reputation. So for Renault to come back, and it'll be interesting and quite laughable, in fact, that if Renault come back as a fully fledged factory operation and end up more competitive than Red Bull, it will almost be like a kick in the guts for Diddy Mateschitz and co.
Oh, absolutely, because clearly, the way things are going, you'd assume that Renault is going to have all the focus on their own car. But if Diddy sees that they end up having these massive inroads, and he's going to be scratching his head and thinking maybe I should have stuck around another 12 months or even into the 2017 era when clearly they've had to endure their downtime. But these things happen. But we see the Red Bulls quite impatient with the whole success thing. They're there for the here and now, and who knows what will happen next. It could happen though. We could see Renault back at the front sooner than later.
Yeah, well, when the marriage is not quite working out, then what can you do? There's not going to be any happiness on either side. There'll be no success. So even if Red Bull had retained Renault for a little bit longer, who knows? The situation might have become so toxic that nothing could have happened. It's the same. It's the same thing when people say, "Oh, Fernando Alonso should have stayed at Ferrari this year," but what some people don't understand is that relationship became so toxic at the end of last year that Ferrari's success this year is somewhat akin to, having a breath of fresh air from Sebastian Vettel and all the new technical personnel that they brought in as well, and the new management system. So yeah, it'll be an interesting one to see. But good on Renault for coming back. We have another manufacturer with a fully fledged manufacturer team as well in Formula One, which it seems in this era of manufacturers and engine suppliers that is the right thing to do. So they're playing it well.
Yeah, good luck to them. We do hope to see them there or thereabouts, but we're not going to be too surprised ultimately on the back of Matthew Carter's remarks. We don't expect them to be trailblazing, taking it to Mercedes, but ultimately, I think 2017 we can really expect them where they were around that Fernando Alonso golden era period. Again, who knows? I keep mentioning it. Yeah, I wouldn't rule out Fred returning to Enstone for a final fling, the recoupling of that relationship, which has ultimately delivered him his solitary 2 titles now after all his efforts across McLaren, Ferrari, now back to McLaren. It hasn't happened. So imagine that. Imagine if these two reunited at just the right time for him to have 1 or maybe 2 attempts at that elusive 3rd crown.
Well, one thing that I wanted to bring up again and get your thoughts on again was considering Carter's comments about next year not being potentially not being as competitive. Do you think that then justifies the choice to retain Pastor Maldonado and of course bring in rookie Jolyon Palmer as well? If they knew that they would have a more competitive car, do you think they would have gone for a more high profile driver instead of rookie Palmer?
Oh, there's no doubt that Pastor Maldonado is a mere placeholder at this time. His Bolivars are gratefully received by the operation nonetheless, and whilst he's improved quite dramatically in the back half of this campaign, he's not going to be really looking at it from Renault's point of view. He's not going to be a driver they're going to build this title bid operation around down the track. He's already into his 30s, and clearly he's still got that reputation as crashed-or. And really, when you look at all the names that are there that are more attractive propositions, even Daniel Ricciardo, perhaps, if Red Bull ultimately did drop off the grid, or Verstappen, or even, as I say, Alonso, they've got to be the priorities. And as for Jolyon Palmer, who knows what he could do? Clearly, he's been given this chance after he did make those remarks that he would be pretty much leaving the Formula One fraternity if he wasn't given it. And now he's got an opportunity, and he's got to prove himself whether he earns that right to have a competitive car 2017 and beyond. It's up to him, I guess, to turn the heads.
But he does. But Jolyon as well comes with a lot of backing, financial backing too, from Daddy Jonathan. So just in terms of sponsorship for the team and funding, it's good for them to get that base set up heading into 2017 in that regard.
Oh, absolutely. And anything that comes in between is a bonus. If we see a few podiums, then clearly they'll be quite content with that. But all eyes will be for them, 2017 and beyond.
All right, then we'll move it on again. And Kevin Magnussen, a driver that we thought potentially was in the frame for Renault next season, Lotus, and a number of other seats. Looks like he's been left in the lurch again, and it's unlikely that we might see him in F1 on in 2016. And Haas revealed just this week, or sorry, it was last week, that if Grosjean couldn't be persuaded out of Enstone, Magnussen would have been their primary driver. So that's an interesting thing to hear. But we'll go over what's happened this year with young Magnussen. And Australian Grand Prix, he was able to fill in, substitute for the injured Fernando Alonso, albeit didn't actually end up getting to race as his car his McLaren did fail on him on the warm-up lap. And on his 23rd birthday, not too long ago, he was released from his contract with the team. And yeah, a bit harsh, as we said a couple of weeks ago, but where's his future going to be now? Is it going to be in another category, World Endurance Championship, IndyCar perhaps?
Her deal, I believe, was at Andretti Autosports there to run an entire campaign stateside, yet he got the late call up when Alonso had that very infamous now incident in the second pre-season test to fill in, and you saw how that all panned out. Ultimately, it was a big flop for Magnussen when his car expired on that warm-up lap, and that's really been the extent of his output behind the wheel on track this season. So for him, wherever he goes, then he deserves his successes there, and if it ends up being that he enjoys it more in any of those categories and he has no designs on coming back to the F1 paddock, then I guess it's just the F1's bad for not none of the outfits taking a punt on him.
Well, we did hear overnight that he did a LMP1 test with Porsche in Barcelona, and he, along with a McLaren development driver Oliver Turvey and GP2 racer Mitch Evans, the Kiwi, were part of this test. And the potential there is that if Nico Hulkenberg doesn't race at Le Mans next year in that third car to retain the Le Mans crown, that one of those three could have the chance. And yeah, you said that there was some positive news to come out of that. Magnussen pretty thrilled with his first impressions with that Porsche.
Yeah, all his remarks were that it's the most advanced race car in the world. And strong stuff coming from someone who's been committed to Formula One for the balance of his life there, and to come straight on board this now, it's pretty much going to be a title-winning machinery. We can see with Mark Webber on the verge of his real breakthrough title there. So if he could seamlessly fit in there, who knows? He could be really the one fighting for Le Mans victories and titles next season.
Yeah, and just quickly, whilst we're on the topic of WEC, we heard overnight that former F1 driver, and he was a McLaren test driver as well, Alexander Wirtz, is retiring from motorsport. He currently races for Toyota in the World Endurance Championship, but he's going to hang up his helmet at the end of the season from all forms of motorsport. So another driver in only as many weeks who's announced that they're hanging up the helmet for good.
Yeah, well, he's probably not going to be lost to the motorsport fraternity, especially in F1. He's had a huge involvement with the Drivers Association, and on the safety front, he's a very passionate advocate for the inroads there, not least in the wake of the tragic incidents which have really befallen Formula One in the past couple of seasons. So he's surely going to be somewhere around in the paddock across both categories in the coming years.
Very true, but we'll go back to what we were talking about. And yeah, Magnussen's replacement at McLaren as test driver now, Stoffel Van Dorn, he will actually test for the Super Formula category in Japan, and just so he can race as well next season, as well as his McLaren reserve driver duties. But that's interesting that, Van Dorn will be allowed to race, whereas we don't understand whether Magnussen was given that opportunity during his reserve year this year at McLaren. So is that favouritism towards Van Dorn, or?
Perhaps they've just learned on the, in retrospect, having seen Magnussen quite disgruntled now, he hasn't had anything to do, that they've realised Stoffel needs to stay in race trim, and Super Formula, of course, is quite a competitive category these days. That'll really keep him sharp, and who knows if he needs to be called up to a drive sooner than later. If Alonso decides he's had enough any time throughout 2016, he could slide straight into a role, and then who knows 2017 whether he does make a jump even into a Renault seat, I should say, given that link with the art boss Vasseur, who is looming as the new principal there at Enstone. He could go there for a year or two, and McLaren would ultimately, you'd think, that'd put him in a seat sooner than later, in their own seat, that is.
Sooner than later, but dare I say, we must ask the question that, is it injustice that we have to not have someone of the caliber of Magnussen in Formula One?
Certainly, you can think of probably almost a dozen drivers who would fit below the Dane there. We saw his solitary campaign in 2014. He didn't quite set the world on fire after that amazing debut he had, where he was third and then inherited second at Australia. But he was really making those inroads, which you'd expect from a rookie in a really quite a poor chassis he had 2014. Nowhere near as bad as the 2015 iteration, naturally, but he was warranted of another season, and now to see him second season in a row that he's not been afforded any opportunity, even at a backmarker outfit, then really it's a bit of an indictment just on the state of F1 that we've got these Maldonados and the like that are constantly being given the nods because of the capital which they provide.
Very much so, and whilst we're still on the McLaren topic, we're going to head down Nostalgia Straight and talk about McLaren's last Grand Prix win. And if you can believe it or not, it's been 3 years since that last victory that McLaren scored at the Brazilian Grand Prix. That race, of course, was sort of the battle at the front for the win for the victory was paled in comparison to the championship fight going on between Fernando Alonso and Sebastian Vettel, with the latter ending up clinching his third title. But it was a masterful win for Jenson Button in the wet. He's always quite good in those tricky conditions. And unfortunately, as we alluded to earlier as well, the outgoing Lewis Hamilton, who was moving to Mercedes in 2013, had that collision with Nico Hülkenberg going into turn one. Force India actually were on form during that race. We thought perhaps they could be on for the victory there, but their chances came to an end when Hülkenberg and Hamilton ended up colliding with each other, and Paul di Resta as well at the time, who was with Force India, hit the wall with only a few laps to go, and the race ended under safety car. So that was the last victory for Button and McLaren, and 3 years later, it doesn't look like they're any closer to getting, are they?
No, they'd even just make a podium at this point, let alone it's been a while for them, of course, since even that's occurred. So getting that victory, it's probably a bit more of a longer-term ambition, but it's a representation of how far they have fallen. And since that time, really, it was quite significant. Now we see it with Lewis Hamilton's departure to Mercedes. That was pretty much the last time that they were a force to be reckoned with. And ever since then, each season, they've been falling back further and further.
And it was, we absolutely agree with what you say. But it was interesting as well. Yesterday, I was looking back at an Autosport article from February this year, and Jenson Button said that back then that he believes that McLaren could win before the end of the season. And this was after pre-season testing had commenced, and considering where they were back then. But yeah, we've got 2 races left, and is there any chance for McLaren to win? I know it's a rhetorical question, but as much as everyone is taking the mickey out of McLaren at the moment, it is quite disheartening to see a team of that caliber just at the back there, considering how much money that gets poured into McLaren as well, and how much success they've had in the past.
It's not really to the extent of a Red Bull that you would say they made their own bed, but they should have probably known what they were signing up for when they renewed this erstwhile successful collaboration with Honda. Everyone was thinking probably quite naively that they would hit the ground running, just continue where they they were not quite winning titles at the end of that 1992 season, but for the majority of that tenure, 1998 to 1992, they were quite unbeatable. And we've seen now, we don't even know if next season they're going to be contending for podiums, much less victories. So it's been a bit of a slap in the face to those diehards, but ultimately, that's the reality of how it is these days. You need multiple seasons to build up. Even with the Mercedes, have seen it took them 5 years to get to the point where they're now really the ones to beat, and by a long way.
But they weren't Mercedes back, when they came back in 2010, they weren't exactly backmarkers, were they? They were able to get that odd podium from the get-go per season. But yeah, McLaren are essentially relegated to being backmarkers. And we've said plenty of times on the show that with Manners' upgrade next year to Mercedes power, and of course the technical help from Williams as well, that they could potentially be ahead of McLaren if McLaren don't move further up. So this is even worse in a sense.
Yeah, well, you'd hope for the sport it doesn't happen, but if that's what it takes to trigger some sort of snap, which just compels all parties concerned there to reassess their long-term strategy, then perhaps that's what needs to happen. And if it results in Fernando Alonso being disgruntled and moving on, then perhaps it's not a bad thing. They can regenerate once again, and sooner or later it's got to come right for them. All the money that they've invested, it's going to have a return at some point. It's just a matter of being patient for those who have been waiting now for several years, dating back to even when they were still with Mercedes.
But patience may not be something that their shareholders have, so it's fickle, this game, isn't it? But I guess we just got to look to be optimists then in that regard and see if 2016 is an improvement, which everyone is hoping it should be. But apart from that, Baden, I think we're pretty much done for today.
Yeah, I think nothing more to add after that. We're just got to let it play itself out.
Yeah, very much so. And as I said, we'll be back on Sunday to do our race preview and do a wrap of qualifying for the Brazilian Grand Prix as well. We look forward to having your company then. But for today, Wednesday, the 11th of November, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you guys next time.